everyone. Good evening. Thank you all for joining us from wherever you are right now. Today, obviously, this workshop is going to cover financial aid and scholarships. And so, if you all don't already know who I am, my name is Matthew. I'm the Director of Academic Opportunities, and I will be graduating this spring from Stanford with a Bachelor of Science in Bioengineering. And later this year, I'll be attending med school. I haven't decided where yet, but that should be coming up soon. So if you have any questions about Stanford, about being pre med, definitely shoot those my way. I'm always eager to help chat. And then I'm always eager to chat. And so at the end of the presentation, I will have some of my contact information for you all to reach out should you want to do that. And also throughout the entirety of this presentation, just feel free to utilize the chat feature. We're also in the participant handle in the participant window. You can also like raise your hand. Um, I may or may not be able to see it since I'm in presentation mode, but nonetheless, use the chat feature. Or also even just feel free to um, unmute yourself and ask a question whenever you have one, just so that everyone could yeah. So just everyone, if you have a question, just utilize those features. Um, but with that, I think we're ready to get started. There's some more people entering the waiting room, and if, like I said earlier, just go ahead and rename yourself to state whether you're a mentee, a mentor, or if you hold another position in EPLN. So let's go ahead and just get started. So this is just a little bit of a kind of a basic overview of what financial aid is, if you don't already know. So basically, financial aid, it's kind of a term to describe all the basically like financial assistance that you and your families can use to pay for the expenses that you incur while you're pursuing a post-secondary education, whether that be at a 2-year institution, at a 4-year institution, or otherwise. And so this financial assistance is usually used to cover costs such as obviously tuition and fees, books, materials, equipment, also room and board, travel, and so on. And so there's obviously there's a variety of things that you'll need to pay once you get to college. And so financial aid is really what's going to be there to help you pay for those things if you do qualify. Well, yeah. And so getting into the different types of aid, there's first gift aid, which basically, as the name states, it doesn't have to be repaid. And so this gift aid group includes things such as scholarships, which can be awarded for a variety of things, ranging from leadership to financial need, as well as grants, which are usually awarded for financial need. And these grants are awarded either by the government, such as the Pell Grant, or also via the institution that you attend, so institutional grants. And so these two things together, scholarships and grants, they never have to be repaid. It's basically free money. Um, and that's typically the type of money we like to get, just because it doesn't really have any strings attached. Well, sometimes it does, but we'll get into that a little bit later. Um, and then the next type of aid we have is something that you all may be familiar with, which is loans. And so, just like any traditional loan, it's money that is given to you by a lending institution. And then ultimately, once you are able to make payments on it, you do have to start repayment of that loan. And depending on what type of loan you have, there are various things that differ between loans. So things such as interest rates, deferment. So like when you begin paying the actual principal amount on the loan, well, you have to pay the interest first before you start getting to the principal amount. But nonetheless, there's differences between the type of loans that you can qualify for. And then lastly, employment. And so if you are a college student, typically this employment, if you don't seek it outside of your institution, typically it might encompass federal work study. So this is a program. Federal work study is basically a program wherein you are able to find a job on campus somewhere, so in like the bookstore or in a lab or some other place. And if it qualifies as federal work study, then you'll basically be able to to study while working, and the majority of these jobs allow you to kind of just like do your schoolwork while you're there doing the job. So whenever someone approaches you, you like are in job mode, but otherwise you're able to do your schoolwork, and then the best part is that you get paid for it. And so yeah, so if anyone has any questions about that, let me know. But if not, let's continue moving on. And so the primary application that you're going to be using or submitting to apply for aid is the FAFSA, which stands for the Free Application for Federal Student Aid. And so this is an online application that you submit each year to see whether or not you qualify for the grant aid, the loans, and the work study. And so states and colleges use this data to offer their own aid to students. And like we talked a little bit, uh, like we talked about a little bit earlier, the federal grants, which are things that don't need to be paid and are need based, include the Pell Grant and the SEOG, or the Supplemental Educational Opportunity Grant. And so the Pell Grant and the SEOG do have like a max limit that can be given out on a yearly basis. And so there is not some kind of infinite amount of grant that you can receive. There is a cap on it, but nonetheless, if you are eligible for it, there's a good likelihood, there's a good chance that you're going to qualify for some other type of aid, whether it be from your institution or something just such as a need-based scholarship. So we're going to talk a little bit later about EFC, but that's a principal number that is used to kind of quantify your need. And then the federal loans available, there's a direct unsubsidized or direct subsidized, the direct plus, and the direct consolidation. And if you're interested in learning a little bit more about these federal loans, they can get a little bit tricky to kind of like understand the stipulations of them. But nonetheless, the FAFSA website does a great job of going more into depth about these loans um, if that is a route that you think you may have to take in order to pay for your college. But nonetheless, I think at least, oh, never mind. And then moving on to lastly, work study, which, like I said earlier, is part time employment for part time or full time students that have some kind of financial need. These jobs can be on or off campus, and usually, I think, or at least in my experience, the off campus jobs have been at like nonprofits or some other institution that has like an affiliation with your school. Does anyone have any questions about the FAFSA? This is what the FAFSA webpage looks like. I feel like it's pretty intuitive to navigate it, having done so many times now, having applied for aid while I've been in school. But if you're new to the FAFSA, there is obviously kind of like a registration process where you have to create a username and password. And I highly recommend that you write down this username and password somewhere that you can easily access it, because you are going to be having to use it for the entirety of your secondary and even post-secondary education. I mean, it's a post-secondary education. Um, so I strongly recommend you write it down somewhere like in your notes app or something that you know you can access it at a future date. It's just so nice to, especially now that you're juniors, once you get into senior year, you're going to find that you're going to have a bunch of usernames and passwords. And so if you could just create like an Excel spreadsheet or something to help you consolidate all those names and stuff, then it'll definitely be easier later on down the road, and you won't be having to reset your password or reset or search for your username every time. But nonetheless, if you haven't submitted to FAFSA before, you're going to create a login, and then you're ultimately going to fill out the FAFSA. And so once you go to the FAFSA and you fill it all out, the FAFSA basically here in the bottom right corner, I have a list of like the required documents that are needed to submit the FAFSA. And so you will need your parents' tax returns. So this includes like the form 1040, which is the main form for your tax return, and then all relevant schedules from 2 years prior. And so the way that the FAFSA works is, say you're submitting an application for the 2021-2022 school year, then you would be using tax information from 2019 in order to fill that out. Um, and additionally, you may need your parents' W-2 form. So if they are working and their job gives them W-2 forms, then you will also be needing these, and also from 2 years prior. And I don't know if this is a situation for any of you all, but if you are, if you're not classified as a dependent, or if your parents don't file with you as a dependent and you file as an independent, then you will also need your own tax information and your own tax records. So that's also something just to keep in mind. But I would assume that for the majority of you being high school students, you are classified as dependents of your parents. And so at the end of the FAFSA, once you've gone through all that submission of that, once you've gone through the submission of all that information, you'll in the end receive something called a student aid report. And so this is basically a document that is given to you that provides some information about your aid eligibility and gives you a summary of your responses to the application questions. So like every field that you filled out will show up on that SAR, and you'll be able to see if any of the values that you entered were not correct, and then you'll be able to petition for basically your FAFSA to be corrected to reflect those new changes. But for the most part, the FAFSA is also really nice, since because it's tied to like the government, then and they have this feature in completing, like when you're completing the form, they have this feature where you can directly be taken to the IRS website, and then using your parent's social security number or some kind of other identifier, you're able to kind of you're basically able to look up your parents' tax records and then import all that information into the FAFSA directly. And so you don't have to hassle with going line by line to manually input each of those numbers. And so that's something that's really nice, and it really facilitates ease of submitting your FAFSA. And like I said, like I talked about a little bit earlier, one number that you get at the end is the EFC, which stands for your expected family contribution. And this number doesn't necessarily reflect monetary value, but it's more so an index number that colleges use to see how much age you're eligible for. And so a basic calculation that is performed by the institutions are subtracting your EFC from the cost of attendance, and then that kind of gives a little bit of a metric for how much financial need you have. And so if your EFC is lower, then that is indicative of you having greater need compared to someone who has a higher EFC. Does anyone have any questions about the FAFSA before we move on to another form that you'll have to be submitting for financial aid? All right, so let's keep moving. Besides the FAFSA, you'll also most likely have to end up submitting the College Board CSS profile. This is another online application, except the difference here is that it's to apply for non-federal student aid. Um, it's used by a variety of colleges, universities, professional schools, and even scholarship programs to help in determining your financial need and making those scholarship awards or those financial aid awards. And what's nice about the CSS profile, but is also kind of cumbersome, is that it does provide a more thorough picture of your family's finances. But unlike the FAFSA, you do have to manually input all these values, and it's just a little bit more rigorous to complete. But nonetheless, I would strongly recommend you to. Well, it may be required by your institution, but if you're like looking into scholarship programs or something that require the CSS profile, it's definitely worth the time to complete it. But a quick note is that if your parents are divorced or separated, you will likely also need your non-custodial parent to fill out the CSS profile. So that's just something to keep in mind. But also of note is if you don't, if you're kind of estranged from your non-custodial parent, if you're in that situation, then there is the option to file a petition to be exempt from that requirement. Um, yeah, to be exempt from that requirement. And so in the instance that that does occur, then you can kind of go that route. But for the most part, you will need both of your parents' information to complete it. And additionally, there's a section on the CSS profile that allows you to explain any extenuating circumstances that should qualify you for aid. So I just actually completed my own CSS profile for med schools, and so there's kind of like a drop box with all these different boxes that you can check, and then they give you around like 2,000 characters, I believe, to elaborate upon the checkbox the boxes that you check. um, so that's a nice way to give the people that are looking at your CSS profile a more complete picture of your family's finances, any kind of your family's financial history, or even any other circumstances that would warrant you that would make you more eligible for aid. Does anyone have any questions about the CSS profile? And also, it's not included here, but something kind of attached to the CSS profile is something called the IDoc. I forget what the acronym stands for, but basically, it's kind of like a secure platform for you to submit all those tax documents and whatnot to the institutions. And so it's just kind of like an upload platform that you utilize to submit all those forms. But it's dependent on what kind of like what institution you attend and what they require. Yeah, so these two applications, the FAFSA and the CSS profile, obviously don't. Um, I mean, they provide metrics that kind of give you an estimate of how much age you might qualify for. But if you want something that's a little bit more concrete, um, something that's not just a guesstimate, then definitely I would suggest looking to see whether the institutions that you're interested in applying to have either one of these tools or a combination of the two or a combination. And so in order to better estimate your costs, this is kind of biased towards Stanford because that's where I attend and that's what I am most familiar with. But nonetheless, for example, in Stanford, they have a quick college cost estimator that allows you to input some basic numbers, or again derived from your parents' taxes and stuff like that. And so once you input these numbers, then it'll basically spit out a number that is not necessarily the exact number that you'll be expected to pay, but a good ballpark amount for what you can expect to pay if you do end up attending. But also, I think though this chart on this table on the right hand side is a little bit more common with schools where they provide like a total gross family income breakdown by in intervals, and then based on that they also show you how much the average scholarship and grant is, and then what the average net cost is, and then kind of like the percentage of applicants that qualify for scholarship aid from the institution. And so this is also just a nice way for you to see which category you fall into and get a better idea more or less of what you can expect to pay should you attend there. So once you've actually been accepted to your school, then they'll go ahead and send you something called an award letter. And it looks very similar to this. And so basically what it is, it's a letter that breaks down the charges or the cost of attendance, and then the the money that's being given to you, which is scholarships and grants. And so based on how these numbers work out, then there'll be something called the net cost to you, which is basically how much you're going to be expected to pay. Um, and this can be either paid through something called a parent contribution. So, based on what your EFC is, your parent contribution may be zero or maybe some other amount. But usually, if you have a low enough EFC, then that demonstrates that your parents may not necessarily have the means to contribute to financing your college education. And so, in that case, they'll your institution will be like, okay, well, we're not going to make the parents pay anything or pay a large amount. Instead, we'll shift it to something known as like the student responsibility, which you're responsible for, and you can pay it through like federal work study, or you can get some other kind of job or find some other source of income to be able to pay that off. But usually, if you have a low EFC, that student contribution shouldn't be that large in comparison to the total amount for attending the institution. Is anyone curious about any one of these kind of um, charges or scholarships and grants that show up here, or do you have any questions about them? And obviously, this award letter, which happens to be my award letter, um, doesn't have any loans whatsoever. So that is a little bit of a difference from one that you may or may not receive, where loans are something that is offered to pay to finance your education. And so they would show up here under this kind of like loan programs category. All right, so now that we talked a little bit about financial aid, like from the institution or the government, we can transition a little bit into talking about scholarships. Um, so, like you may already know, there are scholarships for literally anything you can think of. Each year, there's around 1.5 million scholarships available, and they amount to somewhere around $6 billion. And so that's a huge amount of money. Um, and the sad fact is that every year, millions of those dollars don't go, aren't claimed by anyone because either no one has awarded them or just the scholarship isn't known about. And so it's kind of sad that like all that money goes to waste. But I'm hoping that we can push you to find that money that isn't claimed. Um, and yeah, so college can obviously be expensive, and you definitely do not want to miss out on any kind of free money. We already talked about grants, but scholarships are usually for larger amounts, and they're usually one of the ways you can rack up a lot of funds to help finance your education. Some a common misconception is that have to be some kind of perfect applicant. You have to have like a perfect GPA. You have to have like this rap sheet of extracurricular activities. You have to be like in the top 10 and all this stuff. But that's simply not the case. In fact, there are scholarships for absolutely anything. And so we'll talk a little bit about it a little bit later. But if you really focus on like what your interests are, and if you're honest with yourself about how competitive you are as an applicant, if you're looking for merit scholarships, or if you have financial need, then kind of being being open to sharing that financial need with the scholarship organization, and in turn getting money from them, then that's also a good route to go. um, and this is something that's probably said very often, but you never really know unless you actually apply. And lastly, a small award amount can go a long way. And if you receive these small award amounts over time, they will eventually add up. And so, if you're willing to put in the time and effort, it can really pay dividends. This slide is just a kind of showing of all of some of the more well-known scholarships that may be out there. And so they range from the Coca-Cola Scholars Foundation, the GE Reagan Foundation Scholarship, Questbridge, which usually isn't a scholarship, but it's kind of a scholarship. The Gates Scholarship, the Jack Kent Cook Foundation the Jack Kent Cook Foundation Scholarship, the Horatio Alger Scholarship, and then obviously HSF or the Hispanic Scholarship Fund. Um, and honestly, each of your mentors are probably a great resource for talking to about one of these scholarships, as they may have received one or a combination of them. But even then, I know that there are various people on the EPLN board that have been awarded these scholarships, and they would be more than happy to speak with you. And so, if you're interested in learning more about these and seeing like what it takes to be a competitive applicant for them, then definitely reach out either to your mentor or use your mentor to reach out to someone else in the EPLN network. We're really all here to help you. But that being said, this is by no means a, a complete um, a complete a complete list of all the scholarships that are out there. This is not even not even a percent of all the scholarships that exist out there, but nonetheless, these are some of the more popular ones. So if you're, these are some good places to start to look at. Um, but probably you will have to end up consulting some kind of either app or some kind of website that enables you to do a broader scholarship search. And so, two resources that I really recommend for y'all to consult are these two. The first being PeerLift, and the second one being Scully. And so PeerLift is a little bit newer. It was founded a little. It's relatively new, I guess. I guess you could say it's definitely less, or it's like around 5 or 4 years old. But nonetheless, it includes some of the scholarships that were when you do a scholarship search, you can narrow it down by your year in school, um, kind of your interests. But the database that they have is a little bit limited, and it's kind of constricted to mainstream scholarships, but it's still definitely a great way to get familiar with the scholarships that are most frequently applied to. But then there's Scully, which is a little bit more tailored to kind of like your interests, what you think you might qualify for. And so I think they actually have an app they have an app that you download, and you basically create your profile, and then based upon what you input as kind of like your interests, um, the things that you're looking for, then it'll populate a list of scholarships. So you can look through one by one and star or heart the ones that you are looking to apply to. And so it's just a really nice way to find scholarships. And I think I would say that the scholarship database is definitely larger than that of PeerLift, and kind of includes some of those more niche scholarships that may not pop up in PeerLift. But I think it's important to note that in search conducting your scholarship search, you should do it in a responsible manner. Unfortunately, there are websites or just organizations that that offer scholarships per se, but there's kind of like some behind the scenes things that are going on, where they not necessarily manipulate you, but kind of take advantage of your willingness to apply to scholarships. And so they may be trying to they might just be kind of um, trying to exploit you. And so definitely in conducting your scholarship search, you should be responsible. You should first and foremost probably verify the source of the scholarship. So do your research. Is it a reputable organization, company, etc.? This is kind of like the same process that you would go through if you're like if you're writing a research paper and you have to consult all these different primary sources, secondary sources, and stuff like that. You definitely want to do a deep dive into what the what the source is all about. And so you want to check for reputability. Additionally, you want to make sure that there's evidence of awards. And so, is there a history of these awards being given out, or is it one that's more new? Which isn't necessarily a bad thing if it's a new scholarship, but nonetheless, you should be able to verify that whoever's giving out the scholarship is indeed going to give out the scholarship should you be awarded it. Um, you should also verify the required submission materials. And so, what kind of sensitive personal information do you have to submit, if at all? Are you comfortable sharing that information? How does the organization use this information? Additionally, are the requirements proportional to the award? And so, if you're looking through scholarships and you see that you have to write like a humongous paper, you have to write a humongous essay, and the scholarship amount is only a few $100s. I know I said earlier that even the small award amounts matter, but you should also be diligent and you should also just be smart about how you apply to scholarships. And so, if you know that the time and effort that you put into applying for the scholarship isn't going to pay off literally in the amount that is given to you, should you win the scholarship, then I would definitely look to see if there's a scholarship that's similar to it in terms of requirements, but actually values your work and values your input. So definitely just look for that trade off between the two. Does anyone have any questions about these two um, apps or these two websites? Or also feel free to put in the chat any other websites or stuff that you've consulted thus far that you think your peers may want to check out. I know there's some websites like Fast Web, and they give you like a daily scholarship, list, and you get bombarded with these emails um about these like monthly scholarships and stuff. And so FastWeb, I used it myself when I was in high school, and it's nice, but at the same time, it could get really overwhelming to get all those emails and stuff. So if you're someone that wants to be the conductor of your scholarship search, then I would definitely choose one of these two. But if you're someone that's like um, you won't be like as motivated to look for scholarships, then definitely try to look for a service that curates those scholarship lists for you. But also, EPLN is a great resource. We're going to be sending out, um, we're going to be compiling a list of scholarships, large, medium size, and perhaps some small, that will be provided to you in the coming weeks that you all will be able to consult. Unfortunately, the majority of the scholarship season runs from like the fall to the spring of your senior year, just because it coincides with when you apply to college and when you are accepted to colleges and you have to make your decision. And so these scholarships won't be things that most of the scholarships that you apply to, you won't actually do the applying until the end of next year. But nonetheless, it's a good idea to start looking at what you'll have to be writing, what you'll have to be submitting, but also just gathering like those letters of recommendation. But overall, just kind of going forth with a plan so that summer comes, you're not. Um, once summer comes, you can use your time wisely to formulate a plan. And then lastly, something that's probably not talked about as much are taxes. And so, depending on how much financial aid you receive, then you might actually have to pay taxes on some of it, as the IRS will consider a portion of that aid as taxable aid. And so, a form that your college will be giving you is called the 1098T. And on this form, it's going to tell you how much money was given to you overall, how much was used for um, qualified expenses. So qualified expenses are basically just like tuition and other expenses related to kind of like you being able to complete your coursework, and then everything else is like considered taxable. And so, oh yeah, it says here. Sorry, non-qualified expenses are like room and board, transportation, and insurance. And so it's usually these non-qualified expenses that you'll have to be paying taxes on. Um, and yeah, so it's just important to be aware of you possibly having to pay taxes on money. And so even though I said grants and scholarships are like free money, that's not the case because we live in America and taxes will be with you till you die. And so you'll have to pay taxes on that taxable aid. But fortunately, if you are very, I don't want to say scammy, but if you're very smart with how you file your taxes, you don't have to pay tax. You don't have to pay taxes on that taxable aid. And in fact, you can get a small return if you qualify. If you kind of like if you do your taxes. I don't want to say the right way, but if you do them the way that enables you to get a return. And so if you have questions about that, I'm definitely eager to help you um, know more or tell you more about that. But I think for right now, that's not really that important because you don't have these forms anyways. But once you are in school, I definitely I'd recommend for you to keep all these documents somewhere on your computer or even print copies of them. And so, just like that, we've reached the end of today's financial aid and scholarship webinar. It was a little bit intended to be a little bit of a brief overview, not go into too much depth, but obviously there were some parts that I did go off on tangents, which I can't help myself. But yeah, so I hope you all enjoyed today's webinar. And so we have around 10-ish minutes until the next session starts with one of our other board members, Jordan, about social media with kind of an emphasis on LinkedIn and stuff like that. And so if you wanted to join that webinar, that will be coming up shortly at 7 p.m. Mountain Time. You will have to log out of this Zoom in order to access and rejoin with the other link. But yeah, before then, does anyone have any questions about anything that was covered today? Things that you'd like to see moving forward? There are going to be some supplemental materials that we send out to you and upload to the Canvas in the coming days. And we're also going to be providing your individual mentors with a kind of a guide to starting these financial aid and scholarship conversations with you. And so it has a couple of questions that we'd like for them to ask you all just to better kind of build a relationship between you two, but also better understand your financial situation and how EPLN as an organization can help you reach your goals and obtain the money and obtain the need, obtain the aid that you're looking for in order to make sure that once you're in college, you don't have to stress about paying for it, but also just to ease the burden on your family, both in applying and then in paying for your schooling. And at the bottom here of the slide, at the bottom of the slide here, I have my two emails. I have my school email and my personal email. You can reach me at both. Um, I check them both pretty equally. And so you can send a question or something to me there, whether it's about this webinar, whether it's about pre-med stuff, med school, STEM. I'm a bioengineering major if you're curious about that. But yeah, besides that, does anyone have any questions? Feel free to come off of mute or also populate the chat feature. But if no one has any questions, then I think we could go ahead and end the session. Does anyone else that's present from the board have anything else to say?
I can jump in real quick. Yeah, just to follow up on what Matthew said, if anybody's interested in joining the networking and LinkedIn session that's happening right after this, feel free. It should be in the email, but I'll also put it into the group me as well. But yeah, hope to see you there.
Yeah, so go ahead. Oops. Yeah, also we have the links are hyperlinked in the March newsletter, so just sift through your email to find that. But yeah, it doesn't seem like anyone has any questions. Um, so thank you all for your time. Thank you for spending your Sunday evening with EPLN and myself. But yeah, so with that, I think we could you can just go ahead and log off. And I would encourage you to join Jordan's session as I got a sneak peek of it, and it's going to be very interactive. You'll get a lot out of it, and you'll learn some things that I wish I knew when I was in high school. But yeah, thank you all very much and enjoy the rest of your Sunday.